Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I, the one and only Tiana here once again, and I am back for the likes of the Ninja Theets videos. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Princess Peach Showtime for the Nintendo Switch. So, last time, we've essentially did manage to almost completely done everything for the sake of the Forms of Floor 1. Like, for instance, we did somehow manage to able to find some ninja people. Now, as far as I'm aware, is that, like I said before, we'll save the actual boss challenges until for last. Last is mainly because I always attempt able to save that for last, just like the forms of how it does it in Yoshi's Crafted World, because then again, we'll talk more about that if we get onto that specific challenge. So, anyway, today for this video is about the fact that we're going to be continuing things on for finding those ninja people, and no matter what though, this time around we're going to be doing this for the sake of the forms of the second floor. So this means about the fact that we can able to experience the ghostly castle for the final time, and relatively speaking, I was about the fact that maybe it's a possibility that we can able to actually find some missing sparkle gems in Journey forms of two specific plays, which I know for the fact that we've actually missing one of them in Dashing Thief Peach play in Journey forms within Act 1, and as far as the Figure Skater Peach is concerned, we also missing one. So hopefully we'll get our chance to able to actually get those specific sparkle gems now, and hopefully exponentially we can able to actually finish up almost everything for the sake of the Forms of Floor 2, but then again though, we'll save the actual boss challenges for later. So because of that though, yeah, nothing else has been going on at this point, apart from the fact that, well, relatively speaking though, that's, well, only 2 more days to go, folks, until Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Switch Remake is going to be coming. So because of that though, still I'm basically excited for it, and I'm sure enough though is about the fact that it's probably best if I was going to able to discuss upon the actual review scores is actually going to looks like. In terms of the forms of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Switch Remake, but I'm sure enough though it's going to be really amazing when it comes to the forms of the review scores alike. But then again, we'll have to wait and see what happens. So either way, a few things we want to talk about is about the fact that, well, today's day is of course I would say is the 21st of May today, in some cases in 2024 today. So potentially speaking though, is about the fact that one thing you might able to realize that it's been 5 years ago since Mario Kart Tour beta test has been released, since back in Journey forms within the 21st of May in 2019, and my goodness, while looking back on it though, I found it quite fascinating to see about the forms of some major differences between the forms of the beta version of Mario Kart Tour for the beta test compared to the forms of how it does it on the final release of the game. Like for instance, as far as I've noticed, is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the UI and stuff like that, and on top of all that stuff though, with the forms of the microtransaction, I think it's been absent in the beta version of the game, but it wasn't until in the final version of the game where the actual game heavily utilizes with the forms of the microtransactions, which I'm still not a big fan of, even to this day, mind you. And it's also worth noting for is about the fact that while looking back on it though, that it does manage to able to have a similar system as the forms of not only Dr. Mario World, but also with the forms of certain free iPhone games back then, ranging from, let's just say, Super Monkey Ball Bounce, despite the fact that that game is no longer there anymore. Well, that's just mainly because that particular game has got delisted since in about a couple of years ago. So I'm guessing it's probably because, obviously though, it's about the fact that one of those developers who made Pingle Blast that is not overly keen on with the forms of the Super Monkey Ball version of that particular same exact gameplay style or something. Well, mind you, no matter what though, it's been almost 10 years ago since we've somehow experienced Super Monkey Ball Bounce, despite the fact that, as I said before, we no longer have that game anymore, but that's just mainly because, obviously, as I said before, that game has been delisted, and now eventually becomes the lost media when it comes to the forms of the Super Monkey Ball games. So because of that though, that could be also applied to the forms of certain Super Monkey Ball Flash games, ranging from Super Monkey Ball Mini, as well as Super Monkey Ball 2 Mini, and of course, the most infamous one out of them all though, is Super Monkey Disco Ball. meaning about the fact that it's almost like a rhythm game, and relatively speaking, it's able to promote the release of the forms of Super Monkey Ball Adventure. So because of that though, yeah, that's what I was expecting. So because of that though, and also I do remember whenever I managed able to look on the forms of the actual beta version of Mario Kart Tour, that I do remember since 5 years ago, like I said before, that obviously that was about the fact that I found it was a little bit interesting about the fact that between both Rosalina and King Boo, back then, they usually managed able to bring them to as in super rare variant characters, whilst unlike the final version of the game, they somehow moved those two characters onto the super category. So because of that though, whilst unlike the forms of how it does on the final version of the game, that basically does about the fact that it did say high end as opposed to super rare. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I found it was quite fascinating while looking back and even trying to compare between both the beta version as well as the final version of the game. So because of that though, now as far as I'm aware, that only the beta version of Mario Kart Tour, that it does manage to have a grand total of 30 drivers. So relatively speaking, now is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of not only the normal characters you can able to get, or specifically common, and relatively speaking when it comes to the forms of rare characters, and finally when it comes to super rare, I believe super rare does manage to able to have 4 characters in the super rare category in the beta version, and then as far as I'm aware, on the rare category, it does have, let's just say, for a grand total of 11 characters. And meanwhile, for the sake of the forms of common though, that it does manage to able to have, like, I would classify for saying, I don't know, 15 of those characters or something? Well, mind you about the fact that it has been quite a few days since we actually mentioned something related to the forms of Mario Kart Tour. Well, apart from the fact that I believe that Sonic and Mighty and Ray have already mentioned about the forms of that specific topic in regards to the forms of Mario Kart Tour. And I found it was a little bit fascinating too, for the sake of the forms of the item selection they do have for certain characters. Like, for instance, is that on the beta version, specifically, when it comes to Baby Mario, Baby Luigi, as well as the forms of maybe Baby Peach and Baby Daisy, and even with Baby Rosalina as well, that on the beta version, it does have a different selections of items, whilst compared to the final version of the game, that basically though, they did manage to able to bring us into a new item, which appears to be by the forms of let's just say a bubble, whilst usually relatively speaking, I believe that Baby Mario still has the Burrowing Flower, which relatively speaking, when it comes to comparing both the beta version as well as the final version. So maybe I'm thinking about something else, because as far as I'm aware, that we'll discuss more details about the forms of the actual specific different topics in general and during at some point in the future. But even then though, it's nice to be able to know about the forms of certain comparisons, to know about the fact that, and it's also worth noting for while looking back on it too, that basically though is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the ranked cup system, for the sake of the forms of the beta test tour, that basically though they somehow listed it not only 1 but 2 ranked cups, similar to the forms of how it does it for the games prior. So as a result, those 2 cups in questioning are the Koopa Troopa Cup as well as the forms of the Rosalina Cup. So because of that though, for the Koopa Cup, it does manage to contain Metal Mario alongside with the forms of the B Dasher based off from Mario Kart DS, and of course the Gold Glider. And meanwhile, for Rosalina Cup does manage to contain not only Rosalina, which again, it is incredibly odd, concerning for the fact that that was before, that basically those certain cosmetic characters, including new playable characters and some returning playable characters from Mario Kart's past, that basically those about the fact that the majority of some characters will actually become high-end, and as far as I'm concerned, that basically those about the fact that yes indeed, I have heard anyway, that we've almost at 200 playable characters we've somehow unlocked during the forms of Mario Kart Tour. But I'm sure enough though is about the fact that hopefully exponentially speaking now, we can able to actually guarantee to get more playable characters. Well, it might be a not 100% guaranteed able to actually get all of them though, but that's just mainly because I get the strong sense of feeling that about the fact that no matter what though, we are almost getting pretty close to go back onto the forms of 2023 anniversary tour again. Well, relatively speaking though, we still have no idea of what's going to be the future plans to be held, for the sake of the forms of Mario Kart Tour, as a matter of fact. Well, mind you, I barely touched that game for quite a few times. Well, that's mainly because I'm still not a big fan of the control scheme, and it doesn't help about the fact that I was a little bit disappointed about the fact that they did not support a controller support, specifically with the Bluetooth function, for the sake of the forms of not only for those Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons, but also with the forms of DualSense for the PlayStation 5, as well as the forms of the Xbox One controller, or heck, even with the forms of the Xbox Series X controller, as a matter of fact, and of course the Switch Pro controller as well. Well, generally speaking now, because of how the fact that, well, I can intentionally try to now use my Switch Pro controller now, so I can able to actually play certain mobile games on my controller, for the sake of the forms of no need to worry about with touchscreen support. Well, to be more specifically, while trying to play through Sonic the Hedgehog 1, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic CD, and even with Sonic 4 Episode 2, but there's only one game exception to this, however, though, and that's what appears to be, of course, Sonic 4 Episode 1, well, that's just mainly because the game was originally going to be controlled with the forms of touchscreen only, because obviously, though, there are certain levels that you do need to able to try utilize with the forms of either tilting your phone, or essentially trying to able to swipe your iPhone screen, so just in case you can able to actually get the actual momentum going, at least in one of those levels. And I'm sure enough that we'll get to more details about that if we get onto the forms of our redo Let's Play for the majority of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, when it comes to both Episode 1, Episode Metal, and Episode 2, for a much more better commentary, and of course, much more better quality than the forms of how it does it since back then. So, either way, so as you can tell, we somehow fully completed the Ghostly Castle for about a few minutes ago, and as a result, yes indeed, we did somehow manage to found every single ninja people around here. So now we can able to actually move on to the Dashing Thief Peach in Journey Forms within Act 1. Not only we did somehow so far, we did somehow manage to able to find, I would say, all three of those ninjas, I'm pretty sure. And it's also worth noting for, yes, it's going to be one of those sparkle gems I do need to grab at one hand. So, although I will admit though right away, I apologize for my commentary, it's a little bit slightly iffy at this point. Well, mind you, it's about the fact that it's been about 5 days ago since we've last played this game for sure. And it's also worth noting for is about the fact that I believe we've only got about 11 more days to go until we're approaching onto June month. So this means about the fact that not only for the fact that we've only got about, I would say, a couple of weeks left now, for not only for the sake of the forms of Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble is going to be releasing, but also with the forms of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. So I'm not exactly sure if we might able to actually get the overview trailer for the sake of the forms of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD at some point, or perhaps even maybe potentially speaking of, they'll try to save it up and during the forms of one of those specific mentions for the sake of the forms of the upcoming Nintendo Direct during the forms of about a couple of weeks for now. So because of that though, and we still have no idea of when that's going to be exactly, in terms of what day that's going to be on. It could be either be the second week or the, well, it might not be the first week after all, mainly because no matter what though, that Summer Game Fest is going to be coming up first when it comes to the forms of the actual summer gaming events as far as conventions goes. But who knows? Maybe it'll try to able to show up in during the forms within the third week in terms of the forms within June. But then again, though, we'll have to wait and see what happens. So either way. So there's also another thing I want to point out as well, back into that particular discussion about the forms of certain contents they do have for the sake of the forms of the Rosalina Cup during the forms within a beta test tour, which as a result I've already mentioned about the fact that with Rosalina to be one of those super rare drivers, which again it's pretty weird while looking back on it though, and on top of that with the forms of Bumblebee and finally Cloud Glider. So as a result, yeah, there's nothing else I can really say about those, I guess. So even then, no. And it's also worth noting for too is about the fact that I'm pretty sure about the fact that no matter what though, I suppose that Sonic is completely forgot to mention about in Journey forms of one of those specific topics worth noting for, and that will have to be something related to the forms of one of those another special items they somehow got. Well, to be more specifically, for those of you who lived in Japan, that is, that as it turns out, in Nintendo in Japan, mentions about the fact that the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom soundtrack has been unrevealed, and it actually includes 344 tracks. So, as a result, what they come up with is that basically, though, they're trying to able to actually fit all of those specific musical tracks within 9 separate discs, all in one particular package. So because of that, though, and as far as I'm aware, it's going to be releasing at some point by the end of July, in Journey Phones have been July 31st. So in just about 5 days after the opening ceremony, for the sake of the forms of the, the Paris Summer Olympics, and Journey forms of the actual specific, well, in France, of course. So, even then, though, yeah, it's actually pretty cool, though. Especially if I've looked at it, though, it does look pretty cool with all these, not only the packaging, but it's also with the forms of the CD artwork as well, to represent with the forms of one of those, Sage's symbols, as far as I'm aware. Well, mind you about the fact that, again, it's been quite a long time since we've last played The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Well, this is mainly because, no matter what, though, we've been busy playing through a whole bunch of Mario and Sonic stuff, which is especially noticeable concerning for the fact that, like I said before, that Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is almost approaching now, so we're just about 2 days away for that particular amazing remake to come out. So because of that, though, yeah, I'm actually very excited for it still. So even then, though, yeah, that's what I could really say about it. So either way, though, and there's also another thing it's worth noting for, and that's what appears to be about the fact that there is technically one last game for able to actually try to mention about something, and that's what appears to be about the fact that, well, do you guys know about the fact that both Mighty and Ray have technically already mentioned about something related to the forms of the most recent Game Boy games have been added for the sake of the forms of the Nintendo Switch Online services, with the forms of not only for Super Mario Land, as well as, Alleyway, and on top of that, baseball. But did you know about the fact that it was on Japan only, that there's technically the 4th and the final game has been added, in the forms of the most recent update, for the sake of the forms of the Game Boy selections of games have been added for the NSO online services. And as a result, the game in question, and that is the Japanese exclusive, and that game is actually called The Frog Whom the Bell Tolls. So, as a result, I definitely recognize the game, well, as it's mainly because, thanks to the forms of both Super Smash Bros. For the 3DS and the Wii U, that also applies with the forms of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, by the way, that one of those assist trophies was actually appeared in Journey forms of 3 of those games combined. So because of that, though, well, I never know about the game up until, Super Smash Bros. For the 3DS has came out, along with Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U came out as well. So, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that it's, kind of interesting to say the least. And for I've seen the gameplay footage for that game, as I mentioned this earlier, it does kind of reminds me like a similar vibes as in The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, almost. Even though, despite the fact that that particular game, as I mentioned this earlier, did originally came out in 1992, well, only in Japan that is. And did you know about the fact that that game did came out a year before The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening came out for the Game Boy? Which, I have to admit it though, I found it a little bit fascinating to know about the fact that the actual gameplay style looks incredibly similar to Link's Awakening. And did you know, also, is about the fact that when it comes to that game, as I mentioned this earlier, apparently though, the actual developers behind that game was actually none other than Intelligent Systems. Yes, before Paper Mario and before Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and all that stuff, which I think is also very fascinating as well. Although, despite the fact that I was originally trying to able to play that game, but of course I have zero experiencing it. But before I've seen the gameplay footage, it seems a little bit more similar to, as I mentioned this before, Link's Awakening for the Game Boy for the Zelda games, basically. So, anyway, there's also another thing I want to point out as well, is that I believe we've only got about 10 more days to go, specifically for those of you who lived in the UK, that Harry Potter and the Prisoner of the Azkaban is going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary until the next 10 days. So because of that though, I'm sure we'll try and able to mention more about that particular film during at some point by the end of this month in particular. Mind you, it's going to be on Friday, as a matter of fact, so who knows, maybe we're able to actually let some toys else will mention more about it. I'm sure that might be if the possibilities will came to its fruition. So anyway, and I'm afraid to tell you for this point, guys, is about the fact that there's nothing else I could really talk about at this point today. Well, mind you, about the fact that thanks to both Mighty and Ray, and same applies with Sonic the Hedgehog as well, they all mentioned about a lot of stuff recently. So because of that though, oh, so that's what the Sparkle Gem was. I have to able to put up the actual specific lights on these bushes, so that way it actually just make me able to collect that Sparkle Gem, which I did not notice at first, up until now anyway. So, oh well though, but at least we did somehow manage able to collect every single Sparkle Gems now, during the forms within the second floor right now. So because of that though, again, I must admit though, I apologize for that tongue twist in the end, folks, but that's just mainly because at this point in time, that it feels like that the weather condition it is right now is actually going to start to get a lot more hotter at this point, which, mind you, keep this in mind, that we've only got about 11 days to go now until we're approaching on to the 6th month, and potentially speaking of the final month for the sake of the first half of the year, that's of course June. So because of that though, yeah, we can pretty much expect to know of what's to come during the forms within a summer season, like ranging from a lot of gaming events, alongside with the forms of some more film releases during that time, and it's especially noticeable about the fact that, well, exponentially speaking, as far as I've noticed something, that I believe we've only got about almost a month left until Sonic the Hedgehog's 33rd birthday. So because of that though, it wasn't until when it gets to the point until the 23rd of June, as a matter of fact. So relatively speaking though, everything else will be come to expect. So, and also, what I've noticed, whenever I managed able to continue research upon the actual specific major differences between the beta version as well as the final version of Mario Kart Tour, although despite the fact you still have to able to collect coins as currency for one of those shops in particular, but I also noticed something is about the fact that despite the fact that it also features some of these annoying gotcha moments, just like in the final version of the game, although relatively speaking it was about the fact that on the beta, closed beta test version, that's basically those about the fact that they didn't have that much content on there. Well, that's just mainly because they're just only trying to demonstrate of how that game runs on specifically certain mobile phones, ranging from Android phones as well as the forms of Apple iPhones, basically. So because of that though, despite I've never experienced the forms of the closed beta version back then, well, that's because it wasn't until when September rolls around in 2019 that we were able to get a chance to experience that game for real, despite the fact that in my first impressions is pretty mixed bag. Like, on the other hand though, I enjoyed the visuals for quite a bit, but it's just that, like I said before, I feel like that the controls are pretty terrible to me, but that's just mainly because I'm pretty much more accustomed to with the actual game controller, with the forms of specific Mario Kart games in mind, ranging from the likes of every single Mario Kart games up to this point. So either way though, I'm sure enough though is about the fact that hopefully exponentially, if the Switch successor is about to be approaching on the future, obviously though we can able to actually hear about the forms of the brand new Mario Kart game on that particular Switch successor. So because of that though, again, we shall see what happens in due time, but what I've heard anyway is about the fact that maybe exponentially they're trying to able to actually go into multiple phases for Nintendo Switch 2 or Nintendo Switch successor presentations up to that point. I think, potentially speaking though, that I believe it might able to actually have the exact same formation as what they did for the sake of the forms of Nintendo Switch back in 2016 or something. But then again, now we have to wait and find out during at some point in during the forms of it next month, or potentially speaking though with later months to come, ranging from July and August and September, October, November, and December as well. So, yeah, everything else will be come together for that point. So, And also, fundamentally speaking though, is that we've only got about exactly 7 months left now until Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the movie, is going to be almost approaching soon. So because of that though, still I'm basically excited for it though, and it's especially noticeable, I'm sure that Sonic fans will also be very excited for it. And it's also worth noting for as well, recently we finally managed able to unlock the next cosmetic character, except this time what appears to be Metal Sonic, and as a result, yes indeed, we have recently unlocked Metal Sonic version 3.0. So as a result, after doing a lot of grinding, I'll have to say, I'm feeling extremely exhausted after a while. Well, that's just mainly because about the fact that no matter what though, I'm still not a big fan of the actual character card system, not only for the sake of grinding for level ups, but it's also about the fact that when it comes to unlocking characters as well, like I still really wish about the fact I can go back into the event token system, because that way it's much faster to able to actually unlock certain characters that way. And it's also worth noting for us about the fact that when it comes to leveling ups, that I'm perfectly fine with just rings themselves and occasional advertisement thing sometimes, but it's just about the fact that every once in a while though things change, and as a result we have to use the character cards for everything, for not only unlocking specific characters but also with leveling up system as well, along with those rings you can able to actually just to betting for. So because of that though, yeah, still I'm not a big fan of that system. But regardless of such though, I think it's probably best for me to able to actually take a break on that game for a while, just because, assuming of course, for what I've heard anyway, they're about to be able to bring ourselves the next cosmetic character, but this time around with the forms of Blaze the Cat. So hopefully that will come at some point, but for now, I definitely deserve a break for able to actually playing through Sonic Dash for right now. So because of that though, yeah, you pretty much get the idea what I was expecting to try to mention about that. But I still have some fun with it though still, but I will admit though right away, every time whenever I managed able to launch myself onto the forms of that question mark panel, and basically though, it actually caused a random effect, and every time when my dash gauge does not show up, which means it actually represents you ended up in a boss battle. And I have to admit it though right away, during these boss battles might tend to drag on a bit, especially noticeable it gets a little bit repetitive every once in a while, which is especially noticeable concerning for the fact that it only contains 3 repeatable boss fights, ranging from Dr. Eggman as well as Zaz for one of the Deadly 6 members. In addition to that though, one of those random ghost creatures if you managed able to play as Pac-Man and stuff like that. So generally speaking though, that's all I can really think about it. And it's also worth noting for is about the fact I kind of believed about the fact that we almost catching up to the point about the fact that when it comes to Sonic Dash as a game itself, is almost going to be reaching up over 100 playable characters. Well, almost anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, maybe they'll try to able to actually add it in movie shadow at some point, if to go alongside with the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the movie, which I think that could be possible, and maybe that could be also applies for movie Amy as well, but again, we can't really tell exactly for sure, or potentially speaking though, just potentially speaking, maybe it's a possibility for Super Shadow movie counterpart as well. Well, again, we'll have to wait and see what happens, and because of that though, we're not going to spoil things too much for this point, especially concerning for the fact that we're still on the forms of in May after all, and there's also another thing I should probably want to point out as well. In regards to the forms of replaying through the exactly same place as before, so this means about the fact that no matter what though, if we go onto the forms of Detective Peach plays again, this means no matter what though, we have to solve these specific puzzles again. But thankfully though, we can able to actually traverse into those specific parts in Detective Peach a lot faster than the forms of how it does it on the first time around. Because obviously, relatively speaking though, we don't have to worry about recollecting those specific sparkle gems again, unless if you really want to get out of your way to able to actually grind as many coins as you want, because something tells me is about the fact that there are a couple of dresses that still needs to be purchased, and on top of that, that could be also applies for one of those ribbons as well. So then again though, we'll talk more about that if we continue proceedings for this basically. So, and another thing it's worth noting for is that, as I mentioned this before, about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the beta version of Mario Kart Tour, specifically the closed beta test version, that I mentioned this before, it seems unbelievably bizarre about the fact that it does manage to contain 30 playable characters in during forms of the closed beta version, with the exact same amount as the forms of how it does it since in the base version of Mario Kart 8, with the lack of DLC on the Wii U version. So, although despite the fact that unlike in the Wii U version of Mario Kart 8, specifically the base Mario Kart 8 actually, that relatively speaking is about the fact that King Boo decides to join in with the actual character roster, and usually Pink Gold Peach never appeared until the final version of the game, which as a result I'm still not a big fan of Pink Gold Peach's existence, because who the heck thought it was a good idea? And it's especially noticeable concerning for the fact that it's almost going to be a 10-year gap for that particular existence of Pink Gold Peach out of nowhere. So no matter what though, it's probably best to not to talk about that for right now, up until when it gets to the point until next Thursday actually, for the majority of the forms of the 30th of May, as far as I've noticed something from the get-go, that the original version of Mario Kart 8 is going to be celebrating its 10-year anniversary at some point until next week. So because of that though, yeah, I was a little bit I'm excited for it, even though despite the fact that it's kind of hard for me to go back onto the Wii U version now, mainly because we got ourselves the superior Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Nintendo Switch, after all, because of not only for every single playable characters I was really hoping for, which thankfully as it turns out the character roster is much better. Mind you, we still have to stick around with the forms of Pink Gold Peach after all. Now I'm still very surprised about the fact that when it comes to this game in particular, that basically though there's no sign of the forms of Pink Gold Peach so far. So yeah, that was a little bit more it's kind of hard for me to say about this, honestly, because I know for a fact that obviously I just have to concentrate trying to find these specific ninja people, so just to ensure for the fact that sometimes though it can be easily missable sometimes, because obviously though it's about the fact that you must pay attention to the forms of the actual outlines on specific surroundings. So as you can tell, I accidentally missed that particular ninja, by the way, but that's okay though, because thankfully though we can able to actually go back onto the previous scenery again. But it's just about the fact that we need to able to take care of the forms of that specific Detective Peach transformation first before we do anything. So because of that though, and yeah, that's what I can really say about it. And there's also another thing I should probably want to point out as well, is that I've noticed there's actually another key difference for the sake of the forms of the, with the beta version compared to the final version of Mario Kart Tour, when the actual game did finally came out in the September 2019, that it seems kind of weird about the fact that they did somehow, well, in the final version of the game, they did at least include Baby Luigi, as well as Luigi, as well as Wario and Waluigi from the very start on the beta version of that game. But for whatever reason, on the final version, they somehow basically did not add those characters until later on. So, for instance, in the final version in Day 1, during the forms have been the 25th of September, mind you, in 2019, they obviously did manage to bring 20 playable characters, which, as a matter of fact, few of them we've already know, and some of them are actually brought back during the forms of in the past few Mario Kart games. So, for instance, it's about the fact that when it comes to Diddy Kong, that somehow showed up in during the forms of, I would say since the very beginning of the actual tours department for the sake of Mario Kart Tour or something. And in addition to that though, when it comes to new playable characters such as, well, two of them are actually like, well, one of them is cosmetic, and then the other one is entirely based off an oddity. So, for instance, that we somehow received not only Peachette, but also with Mario Musician, cosmetic playable character. And in addition to that though, it is pretty awesome to see Pauline in the Mario Kart game, but it wasn't until likely 4 years later that we somehow managed able to finally get a chance to receive Pauline as a playable character in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I mean, sure enough though, it is really awesome still. And let's just hope about the fact that maybe that potentially she might become playable in any other Mario spin-off games, like, I don't know, Mario Baseball or something, or perhaps even maybe a brand new Mario Party game or something. Well, time will tell, especially concerning for the fact that, like I said before, we're still on May after all, before we move on to the 6th month of 2024, and as a matter of fact though, it's about the fact that I'm just a little bit more optimistic to know about what's to come. So, But either way though, so yeah, that's as far as I can try to say about this, I guess. Although, generally speaking of, what I've also noticed about this is that, when it comes to the forms of a new additional information I did somehow found out, in regards to the forms of the upcoming Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Switch remake, that I've noticed about the fact that there are some additional new save blocks has been added. Like, for instance, they've only shown us 2 examples of this. Like, one of them appears to be at the entrance of the Pit of 100 Trials, and a hard block has also appeared next to it. Which, kind of think about it, it does kind of remind me like a similar vibes as in Super Paper Mario, because in that game, Super Paper Mario, you're able to actually come across into not 1, but 2 different counterparts of the Pit of 100 Trials. One of them takes place in Journey forms of the flip side, and then the other one, it does manage to take place in flop side. So because of that though, and each of those Pit of 100 Trials does manage to contain a save block nearby, which, I will say, for what I've heard about that, in Journey Forms of a Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake will also contain a save block nearby where it comes to able to entering into the Pit of 100 Trials. I will say, it actually comes in really, really handy. Like, in certain situations, if I come across into tough enemies, and if I'm almost about to get myself my game over during this process, then obviously though, thankfully though, there was actually that particular Heart block is actually also nearby too. Mind you about the fact that it only costs coins, whilst unlike in the original Paper Mario, and that could be also applies for Paper Mario Sticker Star as well. That's obviously though with those 2 games, as I mentioned earlier, does not cost any coins, whilst unlike in the Thousand Year Door, that actually requires coins in order to able to recover your health, and relatively speaking also applies to the forms of flower points as well, I guess. So either way though, I suppose no matter what though, still I'm basically excited able to actually finally get a chance to play the amazing Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door on a go. So naturally speaking though, it's going to be super duper exciting, especially considering for the fact that obviously we've now able to actually get 3 Paper Mario games on the Nintendo Switch, so it's almost like a 50% when it comes to likely obtaining every single Paper Mario games all in one particular system. So yeah, that's actually pretty swell, I have to say. Especially concerning for the fact that the Nintendo Switch is the most uniquest Nintendo system that's ever existed. So because of that though, it certainly did really, really well when it comes to sales numbers, as far as what both Mighty and Ray have already mentioned about this before, and so much so about the fact that it does have some flaws for sure, ranging from the Joy-Con analog stick drifting, which a lot of people complain about, since in Journey Forms have been the first year of the Nintendo Switch lifespan, and on top of all that stuff though, with the forms of the battery life sometimes feels a bit hit and miss, depending on what specific model of the Switch you're able to actually go after. And of course, not to mention though, is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of, I did somehow realize about the fact that the Nintendo Switch game cards are pretty cool, but I really don't recommend you're able to actually put the tongue onto it, because my goodness, it's really, really gross when it comes to able to put your tongue onto that particular Nintendo Switch game card. And relatively speaking though, good thing I did not do that, because obviously though, what I've heard anyway, and seen it already, that my goodness, it tastes revolting. So because of that though, yeah, best assured that you better have to look after those specific Nintendo Switch game cartridges, so just in case you don't want to able to get your game ruined. So just to ensure for the fact that you just want to able to get this in a nice little good condition as much as possible. So either way, so there we go folks, that pretty much does it for Act 1 for the sake of the forms of Detective Peach. And no matter what though, we are pretty much almost finishing up everything for the second floor, because mind you, as I said before, we'll save the forms of the actual boss challenges and during at some point for last. So, and I was really hoping we can able to actually deal with these boss challenges by the end of June perhaps? Well, time will tell though, especially concerning for the fact that we've got a lot of plans to figure out for the sake of the forms of the latter half for the likes of in 2024. like, you know, just watching some brand new films is about to be releasing on the big screen on the cinema, and of course, seeing some more game announcements during at some point in the midway portion of June. So, yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna be pretty much hyped for it. So, anyway, so let's go ahead and buy some more decorations on Journey Forms within Floor 2. So, naturally speaking, we did somehow purchase every single items in Floor 2. And let's just go ahead and double check of what's on that particular store for the sake of the forms of Peach's dress. And I was able to actually try to buy that particular sparkle dress, but I'll save that for probably for later. Because for now, let's go ahead and buy some more ribbons for Stella, for the likes of not only for the sake of the forms of the actual grape ribbon, as I just purchased one right now, but also with the forms of that amazing ribbon for the sake of the forms of Stella as well. So either way though, but then again though, thankfully though, we can able to actually change the actual costumes on the fly by able to actually go to the pause menu and basically hit into the wardrobe, and then that way we can change the actual different dress from there. So yeah, let's go for this, and that will be a pretty cool combination as far as this is concerned. So either way, so yeah, 2 floors has been done, so naturally speaking, we've only got 4 floors left. So next up, we're about to be going to floor 3. So no matter what though, we still have no idea how long this will take for able to actually complete certain stuff for the likes of the forms of, you know, hide and seek challenge as far as this is concerned. But let's face it though, it does kind of remind me of the forms of currently for both Mighty and Ray are both working on to the forms of Yoshi challenge for the likes of Super Mario Advance already. So anyway, so with that being said folks, is that we get endings off this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Princess Peach Showtime. Is that we're about to still continue going through hide and seek challenge, and this time we're going to floor 3. So I'll see you guys until on Thursday. Later fellas.